you had some comment. That's why I asked.
So, my dear friends in Facebook and my friends here, today is the 23rd of January. I am 4 months away from my birthday, and then 2 years away from 75. And I want to speak to you, and we are on Facebook, and we're on our private group. Thank you for attending and listening. Because today is the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Auschwitz, the symbol of Germany, World War II, the symbol of the most systematic machinery of killing, of an ideology of hate, of an ideology that unfortunately exists still today, not just in the realm of anti-Semitism, but in the realm of anti-life, in the realm that we are trying to bring about a substantial change, a change of understanding that if a creator created us in his image, there is no other, that you and I are a representation of that image, of that presence, of that beingness. And therefore, every action that took place in World War II, the extermination of a specific group, Jews, and of course gays and Slavs and whatever the enemy was defined in that particular moment, still exists today. And we have to put an end to it within inside of us, in our consciousness, in our behavior, in our association, and become militant, active, that does not happen again. It was very inspiring to hear to His Royal Highness Prince Charles today at the Yad Vashem ceremony, when he said it in Hebrew, never again. I believed him that he meant it. And it was very inspiring, no matter what particular ideology Vladimir Putin has in his Russia, to understand that it was with the help of the Soviet Union that 75 years ago Auschwitz was liberated. And as I asked many of you to read the book of Primo Levi, part 2, The Liberation of Auschwitz, and what happened to the minds of those people that had been kidnapped and exterminated, and the survivors came out and didn't know what to do with themselves because they did not know where north was or south or east or west, where their home was and how they could return after having been brainwashed in a box in an extermination camp. Think, a place where you arrive in a train and learn that the only way out of there is through a chimney, after you are deceived that if you work well, you will return. There is no space for competition, there is no space for passion, there is no space for love, there is only space for deceit. And in that deceit, it was the Soviet army that arrived first to that area in Poland and liberated it. 75 years ago is nothing. I am so close to it that even though I was not there, I was almost there by a couple of years. My father was in a concentration camp in now, today, so very famous Ukraine. And at this particular time was not liberated. He was still in a camp, in a lager, in a labor camp, in a camp where you had to work if you were useful. Like those camps in which you were selected to the left if you were useless and die immediately, and to the right if you had strength and you were useful and could work till you couldn't anymore. And that camp took another year to be liberated by the Soviet Union, which took over the Ukraine. And my mother was in a ghetto in Romania, which was occupied later by the Russians. In a ghetto means in an area where you cannot leave without permission, and you don't get permission because that's where you live. And if you have friends outside of the ghetto, good for them. They can't come and visit you, and you can't come and visit them. Imagine, 75 years ago, 74 years ago, 73 years ago, when the war ended. And a new order entered the world with human rights. And from human rights, a declaration of human rights entered, that we have not been so correct and ethical in accepting and living. We have actually had it on paper since the late 40s, and we are in the second decade of the 21st century, and we are not standing up for the human rights of the Rohingya. I was very pleased yesterday when Suu Kyi, Nobel Prize winner Suu Kyi, was accused as a criminal of war for her behavior in the non-protection of these people who living under the military dictatorship of Burma, of Myanmar, of Birmania under the Brits, had zero protection. We have work to do. No, I will not be speaking about the next retreat. The next retreat is a small incident as a possibility to maybe correct ourselves, better ourselves, help ourselves. For some, it works. For some, it's not even taken seriously. Because it's only taken seriously if we change and become active militants of agents of change in the world. When our behavior shifts and our word counts and is expressed publicly in an intolerance of not being an instrument of war and decimation, but being an instrument of peace. We cannot tolerate the club of nuclear wars and nuclear bombs and nuclear instruments and negation of a past which is so close. And the biggest negation is ignorance and indifference. It doesn't affect me, so who cares? I wasn't alive, so it doesn't matter. Because historians have taught us very, very well that if we don't know history, it tends to repeat itself over and over again with one group or another group. It doesn't matter. There is only one group at stake here, and that is our group, humanity. The only group at stake is life. And not being conscious that there are commandments for living. Commandments of not lying, stealing, killing, coveting. That there are honorable values that we can follow within and demanding to be followed outside. Not because we're good people. Not because we're going to get a reward in heaven. But we can make this a heavenly abode. A place in which peace is not a dream. In which $1 trillion doesn't need to be spent yearly to have weapons of mass distractions and destruction. Because the distraction is the fascination with the idea that the yellow enemy, will come and do something to us, while they are spending only $186 billion a year in weapons, and we 6.5 times more. Can't we find another entertainment with our time? Can't we really go within and clean up our misery that comes from this life? And if we have awareness and consciousness, what we repeat in this life is the result of unfinished events of other lives. And when we come to other lives and we realize that the essence of living has been forgotten in time immemorial, and that is why we repeat all this nonsense, we can take a deep breath and celebrate that Auschwitz was liberated for it to never be repeated again. We don't need to go back to the Middle Ages and remember that people were being burned because they didn't think like you and me. that hordes attacked villages and killed babies. What did babies think? Have you ever talked to a baby and had a different viewpoint of what you think in reference to that baby? Never. And then that baby is grabbed by the legs and thrown against a castle of blocks of stone, because that baby belongs to a race that the winner is not in agreement with, or sent in a gas chamber because it belongs to a different race or tribe. Today, from very early, I have been looking at this event of commemoration and seeing how leaders of our world come together in the navel of the world, Jeru, navel, solemn, peace, in the navel of peace. And from Argentina to Moscow, from Washington to Paris. Civilized individuals look at what took place. And like the president of Germany said, I can't take this burden off my back. I feel guilty. We messed up. He can't forgive his country, even though he personally wasn't there. I can't forgive being the descendant of victims. I can't forget it because in my epigenetics, my child's stories, I learned so much about what went on that I can't separate it in my mind. If it's a story or I was there. But it's included in my mindset that stuff like that, I have to fight that it never happens again. And the way I was given to fight about it is not to become an enemy of Nazism, but a friend of consciousness. Because I have believed that if the consciousness of humanity elevates, it won't have room for lies, for gossip, for envy, for misery, for enmity, for fear, for anger, and all those passions that we have learned at different times. Because it will be excited with life. And if I can be excited with my life, and I can transmit that to another fellow traveler in this journey of life, once for one moment, and that other one can do it, and the third one can do it, then we can be friends, then we can have peace, and then we can have a different collective. Then we don't have to fight for this huge planet where only 8 billion humans live. Only 8 billion humans. We can use our brain, our technology, our brightness not for separation, but for unification. Now it's the era of technology. With technology, we can bring about healing. We don't need to be attached to ideologies of separation. The country that saw me be born, Chile, is going through such a traumatic pain because different viewpoints have been trying to express themselves. And I anguish for it because one viewpoint has not been given the chance, and that's the higher viewpoint. We're a small country, we're in this together. Why don't we reflect to become an example to our neighborhood that we can live in peace and in abundance, because there is really enough for everybody. And that doesn't mean that we make a cake and divide it in exact pieces. That means that the creation of new possibilities in a time of artificial intelligence needs to be used intelligently. But in days like today, we need to look back and reflect that there is negative intelligence too. The final solution was a Judenfrei Europe. Think if they would have succeeded, how many scientific advances that have been created by Jewish intelligence would not be here today on the planet. Artificial pancreas, telephone, cell phone, Lear jets, so many things that if we don't use them to fight, serve us. Bionic technology applied to medicine. And since that has been my focus, healing and medicine, I cannot give you examples that have been used in engineering that accelerate communication and transportation. Only 75 years ago and 3 days, people were sleeping in bunk beds, 6 or 8 at once, on lumber, waiting for a piece of bread, even though the guards knew that the war was lost. The ideology was still maintained, and it was maintained for years after that. And when we see the rise of anti-Semitism around the world, which is not new in history, it happened in the Middle Ages, it happened in the modern times, it happened 15 minutes from where I live, here in the beautiful state of California, a few months ago. It happened educated by the church, because Jews had so much power that they killed Jesus. If they would have had that power, they would have liberated themselves from the Roman Empire. We need to become revisionists of history. The president of Poland was not allowed to speak today at the conference in Jerusalem, so he didn't go. And he accused the Russians of rewriting history. Wait a minute. We need to rewrite history individually. and stop it. Stop the animosity that human beings have somewhere in their brains based on the insecurity of being. Let me repeat that. The insecurity of being a human being. Psychology and philosophy tries to explain it. We try to explain it and work on it. But we need to awaken the certainty that we are and we deserve to be, and recover the sacredness of being. In the Bible it says that we were made holy, that we are holy beings. And if we're whole beings and holy beings, even if you don't believe in God, even if you don't believe in the Bible, take it as a sentence of self-validation. If I'm whole, if I'm holy, what right do I have to self-deny myself and be less and not demand of myself the highest standards of beingness in regards to all my friends, to all my neighbors? I need not to be a sinner to save myself and go to heaven. And as the Pope said a few days ago, I don't even need to believe in God to live in heaven. Times are changing. And in this 75th anniversary of liberation of Auschwitz, let's liberate ourselves from our inner Auschwitz, from our inner extermination camp, from our inner killing machine, from our inner condemnation that allows only the degradation of our existence, the killing, and not the living. I beg you, let's use this opportunity to plan a life and a world for living. We can. And I say we can because I know one or two people, at least, that can. And that can dedicate their lives to the remembrance of the self that they are. I'm so happy to see here in Facebook, so many people listening. Many of them I know personally, and many of them I know personally for over 50 years. And I remember you, and I love you, and I wouldn't say I pray for you, but many times I think of you and wish you well. I had asked people in the Thursday meeting to participate, and some of you I see, and wish you all the best. Very glad that this baby Liam of 7 months is here too. I love you, and I'm very glad you're there. There are many people who I invited that took the retreats, and apparently the invitation went out late, but I hope it can get recorded from the massive Facebook participation. Let's this 75th anniversary, three-quarter century anniversary, make it a memory that there is no more Auschwitz, no more Rohingya, no more Native Americans suffering and having reclamations for the pain that they have gone. No more Black Americans, whether in Brazil or the United States or wherever, paying the same taxes that white Americans, which sequestered them and brought them in boats as things to work, and still consider them second-class citizens when they should be rehabilitated. Let us end with this empire of domination and annihilation and sacrifice. Help me thinking of who is in need. We don't need children in cages when their parents bring them over to the country that once upon a time was theirs. Let's solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because once upon a time, if we do a genetic testing, we can find high level of familiarity. And let us eventually realize that there is much more similarity in our DNA among each other than dissimilarity. Because if our DNA is only 15% different from a chimpanzee, and some of us look like a chimpanzee, but we don't talk like a chimpanzee, how much more similarity will there be between our Chinese brothers and sisters and our Russian brother and sister and our Kazakh and our Chilean and our Brazilian and all these names that are made up names, and we are told we are that by the time we're little kids, like we're told the name that we have been given at the moment of birth. May the Almighty never allow Auschwitz for anybody, discrimination for no one. May we really acquire the consciousness of peace that we deserve. God bless you. God bless this planet. I love you. Good night.